I'm Caleb Bissinger, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today I'm sitting down with Sam Kass. He was a senior food policy advisor to President Obama, and he cooked dinner most nights for the first family.
When you're in somebody's home in that intimate way, you become basically part of the family.
The meals he prepared in the White House were wholesome. But in his new book, The Last Supper, he says a lot of what we eat is not only bad for our bodies.
You have 80% of the foods produced in the country are not considered healthy.
It's also bad for the planet.
It's the number one driver of biodiversity loss and land use change, number one use of the world's fresh water, and the second main contributor of greenhouse gas emissions around the world.
And the foods we love may be in jeopardy.
Coffee prices are skyrocketing because of climate. Chocolate was up 200% last year. It's going to get worse if we don't get serious about change, but it's happening right now as we speak.
After some ads, Sam and I will dig into what it will take to save our food system before it's too late.
Wish you could become a morning person? You know the type, up before the sun, early morning runs, first one to the office with donuts and a smile. How do they do it? Easy. With the new Galaxy Watch 8, sleep tracking and personalized insights from Samsung Health help you improve so you can wake up to a whole new you. One who, dare I say it, skips the snooze? It's possible. Train your sleep with Galaxy Watch 8. Learn more at Samsung.com. Requires compatible Samsung Galaxy phone, Samsung Health app, and Samsung account.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
The family that vacations together stays together. At least, that was the plan. Except now, the dastardly desk clerk is saying he can't confirm your connecting rooms.
Wait, what?
That's right, ma'am. You have rooms 201 and 709.
No, we cannot be 5 floors away from our kids.
The doors have double locks. They'll be fine.
When you want connecting rooms confirmed before you arrive, it matters where you stay.
Welcome to Hilton. I see your connecting rooms are already confirmed.
Hilton, for the stay.
From 2009 to 2014, Sam Kass had 2 jobs. By day, he was a senior food policy advisor to President Obama, or, as the New York Times dubbed him, Food Master General. He worked on Michelle Obama's signature health campaign, Let's Move, and he successfully championed legislation that gave more than 30 million school kids access to affordable, nutritious meals. At night, Sam changed out of his suit and tie, slipped on a chef's coat, and cooked dinner for the first family. After leaving government, he wrote a cookbook/manifesto called Eat a Little Better. It's one of my wife's favorites. We're especially fond of the mustard green salad with pecans and honey lemon dressing. He also started Acre, a mission-driven venture capital firm that invests in companies creating fundamental change in food and agriculture. And he began cooking high-concept dinners for dignitaries at places like Davos and the UN Climate Conference. His menus relied on ingredients that, due to climate change, may soon become scarce or even extinct. I'm not talking about obscure chefy items like saffron threads. I mean staples like almonds, artichokes, avocados, blueberries, chocolate, coffee, olives, oysters, rice, tea, and wine. Sam called these dinners The Last Supper, and they inspired his new book of the same name. Our food system, he warns, is not only one of the chief culprits behind climate change, it is also, ironically, one of its biggest victims. If we don't change our ways, Sam says, we're headed for a world where the lack of good artichokes and Cabernet will be the least of our problems. As soon as 2030, we may not be able to physically produce enough food to feed humanity. Luckily, in The Last Supper, Sam lays out a plan. It requires shifting culture, crafting new policies, revising business practices, and harnessing the power of new technology. I read it first with a pit in my stomach, and then with a ravenous appetite for how delicious our future could be if we can summon the will to change. Sam Cass, welcome to The Next Big Idea.
Man, it's so great to be here. That was some opening, and I'm glad your wife loves the cookbook, so that's awesome.
We're big fans. POTUS Lucky Pastas is another hit in our household.
Nice.
So look, before we talk about the new book and how we got ourselves into this mess and what we might be able to do to get ourselves out of it, I just can't resist asking, what was dinner like in the Obama White House? What kind of stuff were you cooking?
Dinner for them was actually very normal. They were trying to raise two young daughters, and the First Lady was very focused on trying to create some sense of, a normal family life in there. So like when we got there, the butlers wore tuxedos. And she's like, okay, guys, I'm not serving my 8-year-old, in tuxedos. So she had them just wear regular clothes. And it was one dish, some fish or chicken, brown rice or potatoes and a vegetable. It was on the table at 6:30, just about without exception. And the president made an absolute point of, if he was in the area, to be home for dinner at 6:30. To this day, it was one of the more amazing things. Like when he walked in to that, dining room, he left the weight of the world outside, and he was just like, Dad, figuring out what happened in, fifth grade gossip and what was happening in math class, and just, and nobody could. Are we allowed to swear on this?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. They can give a shit about what was happening in Afghanistan or, whatever his big problems were. It was it was really time for the girls and for the family. And it was a beautiful thing.
You had such an unusually close relationship with them. I mean, you worked out with them in the mornings, you shot pool with the president after dinner. And, you guys, I think, went back. You had known them in Chicago and Hyde Park. So you had this long-standing affiliation. But I wonder how much of the depth of that connection was about food, right? Like, it strikes me that cooking for others, sharing a meal, there's just something about that brings us together and makes us close in a way that nothing else really does.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first started working for them in Chicago, it was just after the president had announced his campaign, just a couple months afterwards. And there was no big team. It was basically the First Lady and Grandma. And she was trying to work her full-time job, take care of these two young girls, and start to campaign and do all the other things she had going on. And, the place that she felt like she could use the most help was around food. And it was partly because her pediatrician said, hey, I'm a little worried about the health of your girls, because obviously it's one of those things that goes by the wayside first when we get super busy and overwhelmed. But, I think when she started to see the impact that food could have on her family, and when you're in somebody's kitchen every day and getting to really know each other. I mean, when you're in somebody's home in that intimate way, you become basically part of the family.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a real bond that grew a lot of depth over time. And then as you sort of are navigating that through insane things, we were in Iowa all together for 10 days and I was cooking for them and all these people as we were also out canvassing, knocking on doors. You start going through these really intense periods and keeping your arms wrapped around those kids especially.
Mm-hmm.
And so she knew even if she was off doing something, that they were always well taken care of, well fed and supported. You grow a pretty deep bond there. And bringing a lot of those traditions, and that was a big part of the normalcy into the White House. It was you know each other, you talk a lot of shit. They know every little detail of your life way more than you want them to know because they're all in your business. It's one of those. It's you help create some sense of reminding of who you really are and not all caught up in the swirl of being president and first lady all the time.
All right, let's leave those warm memories of the past behind and come into the present. How vulnerable is our food supply?
Extremely vulnerable. When you step back and look at the conditions that have produced our modern food system, we've had the most stable climate over the last 10,000 years and even in the last 1,000 years than scientists can observe in the historical record. We've just gotten really lucky. It's been generally very stable and we've had unlimited natural resources, unlimited soil, unlimited water, cheap energy. And so we've been able to kind of create a food system that reflects that largely. And we have somewhere between 60 and 70% of our calories come from 12 plants and 5 animals. And even within those 12 and 5, the genetic diversity within those crops has been completely diminished over time. And it's largely because it hasn't been that volatile. And now we're entering a future where, because of climate change, we're getting extreme volatility, and we have dwindling resources, namely soil and water, which are being lost at alarming rates. And we essentially have all of our eggs in just a few baskets. If you're an investor trading in the market, you would never put all your money in a couple stocks, right? You have a diversified portfolio. For us, we basically have all of our food security in a few crops and not really set up for the volatility and extreme weather events that we're going to be seeing increasingly in the future.
I think it is easy to treat climate change as sort of a catch-all bogeyman for all of our problems. What hard evidence do we have that this is really behind the instability in our current food system and is likely to just wreak incredible havoc on the food system in the future?
The evidence is happening all over the country and all over the world. You can start with your oceans. Our oceans are absorbing over a quarter of the greenhouse gases that we've emitted. And that's actually changing the structure of the water. It's becoming much more acidic. I went up to the Pacific Northwest to meet with fishermen up there who had been suffering at that point from the first closure of the snow crab fishery for the first time in its existence, because we lost over 80% of the crabs, 9 billion crabs over a 5-year period, a total collapse of this fishery. And it's because of these heat waves and acidification, which prevents crustaceans and shellfish from forming their shells when they're babies. So they then had to close it for a second year row, and it looks like it will be mostly closed for this third year. You see collapses of entire crops, like Georgia peaches a couple years ago. We lost over 90% of them because of extreme weather, both early frosts and then extreme heat in the middle. And we're seeing more and more of these complete collapses. We're also seeing a real migration of plants and animals. So in the Dakotas, for example, when we were kids, there wasn't a single stalk of corn grown anywhere in the Dakotas. Now they're corn states because it's getting warmer. So the plants are actually moving north. But that means in the southern parts of the country, there are increasingly hostile environments for growing many of the things that farmers been growing there for hundreds of years. So you're seeing evidence of it playing out all over the place. It's subtle at times enough that you don't necessarily step back and see the big picture. Coffee prices are skyrocketing because of climate, a drought that's hitting key coffee regions. Chocolate was up 200% last year just because of extreme drought. Almost all of chocolate is grown within 10 degrees of the equator by smallholder growers. When you look at the models, by 2050, most of those regions will not be able to produce any chocolate whatsoever. And those that can, the yields will be way down. So this is definitely playing out. I think the one thing that I had gotten wrong was that this was a problem way out in the future. The more I've done this, the more I realize, man, this is all playing out right now. It's going to get worse if we don't get serious about change, but it's happening right now as we speak.
It's also terrible for us, right? The food system we have is not good for our body. It's bad for the planet and it's bad for our bodies.
Yeah, I think this plays out in 3 big areas. One, it is a main driver of climate change and environmental degradation. It's the number one driver of biodiversity loss and land use change, number one use of the world's fresh water, and the second main contributor of greenhouse gas emissions around the world. So it's a big driver. It's also getting its butt kicked because it's on the front lines of climate, but it's absolutely undermining the health and well-being of the country. You have 80% of the foods produced in the country are not considered healthy. And, we have 1 in 3 Americans are on track to have diabetes in their lifetime. It's insane, the health outcomes we're getting. And there's a lot that we got to do to make sure that we're producing nutrient-dense food that supports our health, but of being able to do that at a price point that people can afford. Because right now, it's just too expensive for people to eat well.
I happened to be reading an interview this morning in the New York Times with Pete Buttigieg. And he was saying that he thinks one of the reasons that we're so divided as a country is that we don't have a big shared national project. That if you look at the era after World War II, we had all these ambitious projects that brought us together, right? Put a man on the moon, the GI Bill, put all these vets through school, build the interstate highway system, and that we're just lacking that right now in our culture and our politics. We know that climate change is a highly polarized issue, right? And it's actually a low salience issue even amongst Democrats, right? When you ask Democrats to rank the most important issues for them. The climate change is like at the bottom.
Totally.
But do you think that this idea of reforming our food system to make our planet healthier, to make ourselves healthier, could be one of these grand unifying national projects?
I mean, absolutely.
Or is that just pie in the sky? You can call it like you see it.
No, I'll call it. I can't help myself for better or for worse. You can trust me on that one. I've got myself in plenty of trouble over the years for that. Comparing this moment to like coming out of World War II, I think is a little. I didn't read the article, and I'm a fan of his. But when you're facing a large existential threat like the Nazis, it helps you come together as a nation. And so, from a more unified point, starting big national projects, I think you have a better chance of being successful there. I don't think it's the project itself that unified the country at the time. Now, that being said, I think he is right. We have lost this sense of, unity as a nation to take on hard problems and solve them together. That really has been lost. And I do think that finding opportunities on issues that everybody cares about, you can do some big things. And that is the power of this issue around food, how we feed ourselves, our own health, the well-being of our kids and the next generation. There isn't a human in America. Well, there's a very small percentage of human in America that thinks health literally doesn't matter. I don't care about the next generation. Eat whatever you want. I think there's people who don't connect all those dots around the implications of what we're growing, how we're growing it, the impact on their own well-being, and the impact on our ability to feed our kids well in the future. So that's up to us to start to bring these issues to the country in a way that resonates more broadly. And I think particularly on the more progressive side, we failed to do that, quite frankly. But it is literally an issue that everybody cares about. Everybody's an expert. Everybody knows a lot about food. We all are eating it 3 times, some of us 4 or 5 times a day, maybe more. So we all have a stake in this. And I think that is a very rare and very powerful thing about food. And you don't have to go right on the head and say, this is a climate catastrophe. In fact, people's eyes glaze over and they have no idea what those words mean. Part of the point of the book and the dinners I've been doing is to try to actually give some meaning to the idea of the words climate change or the idea of the word of 1.5 degrees. Like, as a kid from Chicago, 1.5 degrees warmer sounds good. I would be like, that's it. Fuck, let's warm this thing up. It should be like 5 degrees, 10 degrees. We don't have any idea like what that means, but it actually means our way of life as humans is fundamentally under threat. And food is a very powerful way to tell that story and to get people rallied around it. You say coffee, chocolate, and wine. Like, everybody's ready to go on at least one of those products, right? I can't survive without coffee and wine. So that's all the motivation I need. So I do think there is a power there that needs to be tapped into. And I think we just need leadership to start putting the pieces together about, how do you galvanize people? What does that look like? What are you asking them to do? And how do you start showing some real progress? But I think the future of the country fundamentally depends on it.
You think that fixing our food system starts with culture, right? That actually before politics, it starts with culture. And I think that's an interesting argument to make because culture is so fluid, right? It's not black and white the way policy can be. It's not rational the way markets are supposed to be. So why start with culture?
I think what I found is, a lot of the narrative around, from people who work on these issues, the advocates, many of whom are dear friends of mine, paint the very simple narrative, which is easy to digest, and there's some comfort in it. It's like the boogeyman is the evil food industry. They collude with the boogeyman of the government to basically make us all sick and make a bunch of money. And in some ways, it would be wonderful if that were the case, because that is like somewhat solvable. And I'm not saying there's not elements of truth to that, but it is wildly oversimplistic and wildly overstated. And frankly, the government can't just like write a law and dictate what's going to end up on our plates. And by the way, thank God, when you get into the White House and, the First Lady says, this is going to be my signature initiative, you're in charge of it, go figure out how to make people's food better, you are forced to stop starting with your ideals and then sort of saying why everything's bad, start actually addressing the system as it is and try to move it in a better direction. That inherently means, looking for policy opportunities like school nutrition, but ultimately it means dealing with the companies that are actually producing the food that ends up on our plates. And there is no way to craft a piece of legislation that could have fixed that. There's incremental things, but in the end, both companies and politicians are shaped by our cultural values.
Mm-hmm.
Like companies right now, we haven't been telling companies that we care about our health and we want more sustainable food. We've been telling them based on what we buy that we care about convenience and affordability and taste. And, for our politicians, the same way. Like even for Democrats, we're not putting this issue on their agenda as voters. Like the work that Michelle and I did in the White House was not because people were clamoring for and telling us we voted for you to go fix this. We just took it on because we thought it was important. The same thing when you look at the list, it's like climate change or even health. They're just not on the list. Climate change at the bottom and food and health, it doesn't show up. So politicians are not being told that they got to take action or they're going to be voted out. And that's a product that as a culture, we're not valuing our health and sustainable food systems yet. And until we do that, we're only going to get so much out of businesses and out of our politicians. And it's because of exactly what you said. I think your point was really right. Culture is hard. It's fluid. It's messy. It's hard to track. It's hard to get credit for. It's slow. It's amorphous. And because of that, we skip right over that part. But that's the foundation of change. And I think we have to do that hard work and prioritize it if we're going to ever see businesses change and our politics and our policies change.
Trying to change the culture was a key focus of yours when you were in the White House. What grade would you give yourself? How do you think you did?
I mean, on the culture side, honestly, having no way to measure it, I would say it's one of our couple biggest accomplishments. When we got into the White House, like health was just not part of our mainstream discourse at all. And, you had advocates and sort of food companies sort of yelling at each other on the side. But other than that, it was not part of mainstream culture in any way. And I do think that she was extremely effective in bringing these issues to the fore of our culture. And so much has happened as a result of that, including Maha, by the way. And I think, we set a lot of foundation for a shift that has made a lot of progress. I don't think it's come as far as it needs to start to really get the biggest impact. But, she did stuff with making Jay Leno eat vegetables and who hadn't eaten a vegetable in like 30 years, or doing stuff with LeBron or the NFL, or doing stuff with Beyonce, trying to bring these values into our culture in a way that was sexy and fun and popular. I think it was very effective. I think there's obviously much more to do on that, but the country was a different country when we left, when it came to caring about this issue.
So here's my problem with the change the culture approach. You write that ultimately what culture is composed of is individual decisions. And I just worry that if we put too much pressure on individuals to change the choices they're making around the food that they buy and eat, we could end up in a situation where people are making decisions that they can't afford or that they can't sustain. We know that the cost of groceries has gone up 30% in the last 5 years. We know that more than 50 million Americans live in food deserts, which means they don't have easy access to high-quality fresh foods. And I just don't want to end up in a situation where we're putting the burden of changing our food system on individuals.
I'm really happy you raised this. I could not agree with you more, of course. Our food environments are the things that are going to most dictate the choices we make. And, I think there's sort of a push-pull relationship, and there's a conversation between eaters and producers of food, and it goes back and forth, and we have to incrementally move that conversation forward. I think the main point is we have to have policies that support healthy and affordable food to everybody. We have to have businesses that are actually trying to make nutrient-dense foods and putting the health of their eaters at least on the agenda, not just, profit margins and revenue. So there's no blaming the individual. I do think individuals have power here and agency in ways that many don't recognize. And even just like helping to try to create in your own family a culture that cares about it, talking about it at the dinner table with your kids, trying to cook one extra meal, getting a new vegetable in when you can, if you can afford it. For those who have the capacity, there are things that one can do either in their homes or in their workplaces or their community groups or churches and synagogues and mosques to advocate for a healthier culture. And that is part of the change, no question. It's not just going to come from the top down. Like the top has important roles to play, but in the end, the top is basically running scared of people. Politicians and businesses are just like constantly doing testing and polling and trying to figure out what people want and where they're going to go or what they're going to vote for, what they care about. We got to start making the shift in our communities to start to show those groups that this is what matters. So I agree. It's a fine line. And it's absolutely never about like blaming the individual because, you know, if you go to the store and that's all there is to buy, cheap, junky food, that's what you're going to buy. Like you have no choice. But we do have power and we do have agency in our communities, and just using your voice and your choices to the best of your ability to say, this is what I care about, affects others around us. In fact, we trust our friends more than any other part of life right now. Nobody trusts government. Nobody trusts businesses. Nobody trusts anything anymore except basically our friends. So in some ways in the modern era, it's even more influential, like what you say to your peer groups than ever. So that's all I think I'm advocating for, is to people to use that part of their, you know, those relationships and that influence to move this in the right direction. But I agree with you. I think oftentimes people want to say, especially the industry loves to say, we just give people choices. They make the choices for themselves. And like, that's obviously total bullshit. We have to avoid that trap.
If I could make you king for a day, what's the one food policy you would enact?
Oh, man. King for a day. It's a dangerous thing to offer these days.
Dictator on day one, Sam.
Yeah, dictator on day one. I think that question's a little bit of a trap because I don't think there's one thing that's going to solve our problems or even like solve a big chunk of them, frankly. But I think there's a series of things that could be done to really incentivize, you know, different behaviors. You know, if I really step all the way back, I'd probably make investors have a fiduciary responsibility about the impact of their investments, meaning that they and then their companies have to start taking into account the broader impact on society, and that right now their only responsibility is profit. So like, you know, getting rid of quarterly reports, because right now short-termism is driving so many decisions and we can't make the long-term investments to build a more sustainable society if you're only worried about what happens in 4-month increments, where the impact of those kind of investments comes 3, 4, 5 years down the line. So if you want to really step back, like I think it's those structures that are dictating, you know, how we're behaving. I think the other big one in the meta, I'll get more granular, but in the meta, I think that one thing, the other big missing piece we have is the lack of valuing of natural systems. Right now, like we value the wood, but not the forest. And the forest is providing all the oxygen that we breathe, all the clean water we drink, all the diversity of plants and animals and pollinators that depend on a healthy ecosystem that supports our ability to grow food. But we don't value it. So right now, people are making very rational economic decisions to chop it down, whether it is to plant soybeans or to put grass for cattle. I was just in Brazil witnessing the devastation in the rainforest. And these are smallholder farmers that are doing what is rational to help feed their families. They're like, I'm clearing the land so I can make cattle. Nobody's paying me to preserve it. But holy shit, without the rainforest, like we're in serious trouble given the role that that forest plays to regulating the global climate. So we have to start valuing natural systems. So that would be like my big systemic change. I think if you get down more granular just around food system policy, I would enact a carbon market system, regulatory system that rewards farmers for regenerative practices that is building soil health and building soil carbon, and pay them. That for me is the best mechanism to start paying them to do the right thing. And we need to figure out how to pay them to do that. Otherwise, I think the system is largely going to stay as it is. I would put a huge amount of money in terms of research around adaptation and resilience. Like we just are sitting, we're flat-footed right now. We have to figure out what we're going to grow where and how do we actually start mitigating the most extremes of climate. There's plenty of policy work to be done. And I could go on, but policy talk can get pretty boring pretty quick. I actually struggle with that in the book. It's like, this is so fucking boring, but it's important stuff. So, but yeah, I think there's lots and lots of work to do.
You finished this book right about the time that President Trump appointed Robert Kennedy Jr. as the head of HHS, Department of Health and Human Services. And you seemed almost cautiously optimistic that they, I'm quoting you here, might make the issue of health and food bipartisan. Are you still feeling optimistic?
No. I will say on the bipartisan point, the only silver lining I could see coming out of what's happening right now is that Republicans, who, by the way, fought against literally everything we tried to do when we were in the White House, without exception. But now they're on the record saying this is an important issue. If that holds, and call me extraordinarily skeptical that it does, but if that were to hold, there is a big opportunity to get a lot of stuff done. I mean, if I had Republican support in Congress when we were in there, the country would be different. So I'm encouraged by that part, and I support Republicans caring about the health of the country and the food that people are eating. And anybody who's serious about that, I would love to work with them on it. Everything else that's happened so far is a catastrophe. And I don't say this lightly. I mean this literally. I think RFK is the greatest threat to public health the country's ever faced. His attack on science at every turn, the conspiracy theory nature of his policymaking, the lack of details in any of his plans to do anything meaningful, just on food. I mean, right now they've released a report that largely sort of regurgitated the issues about what's wrong, which he has a lot of truth to. And so a narrative that's been out there for a long time. I'm empathetic for why many of my friends, frankly, have been enamored and supportive of him based on that narrative. But when you get to what he's focused on, food dyes, for example, it's just silly. Like, I'm not like a supporter of food dyes, but it literally doesn't matter. Fruit Loops with or without food dyes are still nothing you should be feeding your children. And it's just not going to move the needle on health outcomes. Seed oils, I mean, this man, the head of Health and Human Services, went to a fast food restaurant to promote cheeseburgers and French fries because they were fried in beef tallow. I don't know where to begin to talk about the insanity of that. It just flies in the face of all science, and it is not healthy. In fact, it's decidedly less healthy. And the real things that are going to make a difference in people's lives, they're just not focusing on. And it's a smokescreen. And the problem is it's legitimizing the administration writ large to the public, particularly with key constituents that they need, like suburban moms, young moms who are worried about their kids, who care about, what they're feeding them. They're like, oh, good, somebody's doing something about that. While they're doing that, they're decimating CDC, they're decimating the FDA, they're gutting these agencies, they're gutted NIH, all the key groups we need to regulate and do the research we need. They've rolled back all climate policy at USDA. Farmers are more exposed than ever. In fact, farmers are getting their asses kicked on every level from this administration's policies. It's a true catastrophe.
One of the things I find very confusing about RFK, like, this is a guy who used to be a Democrat, and this is a guy whose positions on the surface level are issues that used to code as liberal, right? A passion for health, a passion for nutrition, getting big business out of our food systems. Why did those issues change sides?
Well, I think it's a few things. I think RFK did a good job campaigning on these issues, and I think he exposed a constituency that had been overlooked by both parties. And I absolutely hold the Democrats accountable for this. They have not continued the work on these issues. There's a couple people who care about it, but as a party, we haven't cared about it. The Biden administration they did one conference. They basically did nothing on it. And so I think we left this issue wide open. I think RFK took advantage of that. And then he just looked at the polling and just decided that Trump was going to win. And Trump, he saw value in RFK's base, which was not a base of support that he had any real into. So it was very politically advantageous to bring him in. But it was really just kind of a raw political calculation on RFK's side, which, I guess you can't fault him for, right? He was just trying to get into power, and he got on the horse that was going to make it. So what flows from that, who knows, ultimately after we, these next 4 years and how this evolves. I think there'll be opportunities, hopefully, to find some sort of rebalancing of these issues, truly make it bipartisan and science-based. And then I think maybe, we can start to make some real progress.
Finished training for the day? Time to fight post-workout fatigue with Core Power Protein Shakes. They're packed with 26 grams of high-quality protein to build muscle and electrolytes to help hydrate. The nutrition you need to help your body replenish, rebuild, and repair post-workout so you can power on to the next one. Champion your recovery with Core Power. Visit corepower.com to learn more.
My marathon isn't about time. It's about my 26 friends with intellectual disabilities I'm dedicating each mile to. I'm Joseph, I'm running my first Bank of America Chicago Marathon for Special Olympics Illinois to help give my friends a place to shine.
Join Bank of America in supporting Joseph's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportjoseph. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America.
References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation.
Big news. Sephora is now on Uber Eats. So if you find yourself facing a beauty emergency, like needing a last-minute gift, or you're just out of your favorite mascara, again, don't panic. We got you. Order now and get $10 off on Sephora orders of $50 or more on the Uber Eats app. Order now. Offer ends October 30th. One order per customer. Additional terms apply. See app for availability. Delivery fees may apply.
After you left Washington, you helped start a venture capital firm called Acre, which, as I mentioned, invests in food and agriculture technology. You know, I think a lot of food advocates actually have sort of a knee-jerk resistance to using technology to get ourselves out of the food crisis that we're in, right? There's sort of it's not pure, or I don't know, I don't quite know where that resistance comes from. Are you a techno-optimist? Like, are you optimistic that technology can help us change course?
I would say I'm a tech. Definitely have referred to myself as such. I guess I would say I'm a techno-optimist, but I am not a blind techno-optimist. If you just step back and look at the history of agriculture, it is a history of technology. Like literally, it is the entire story. And with each sort of major breakthrough, like the metal plow was transformational to the world. And so many of the new ways of living are rooted in the plow, just as an aside. And there's been a number of those breakthroughs over the centuries, and those are all been real revolutions in society. So this idea that somehow technology is a new thing is sort of silly when you look at it. And I think we will always be striving to create new tools to do things better. That's sort of part of the human condition. And I do think, given the unprecedented nature of some of the challenges we face, we're going to absolutely need some new tools. The question is, how are these tools applied and who benefits? Mm-hmm. We should be asking that question at every turn of every new tool that's being developed. And I personally care about the health of humans and the health of the planet. So I think it's important for people like me and my partners in the firm, and there's others out there doing similar kind of work, not a lot, but there are some others. We need more, frankly, who are in these rooms fighting to try to build tools and apply them in a way that are going to be beneficial to society. If the only people at these tables are ones who are trying to extract as much profit, and that's the only thing they care about, we're going to keep going in a pretty bad direction. So the idea that we got everything we need and it's just about going back to these old ways is a false paradigm. Like, you cannot go backwards. It literally is not possible. The only way is to move forward. I think what they're trying to say is there's knowledge from the past about how indigenous communities have produced food and lived in much more balance with the natural world, or how, other communities around the world have done things. And there's wisdom for us that's been forgotten that we should be remembering. But you can't go backwards, and it's going to have to be evolved into modern context and modern times. And so I'm skeptical, and we have real debates, like harsh, sometimes like intense, not nice debates.
You seem like a person that likes an intense debate.
I can get down with a pretty intense debate. You ask my partners, but yeah, we hash it out about like, what do we think is actually going to happen here? And sometimes it's clear, and sometimes it's in the gray, and you got to make the best call you can on it.
What are some of the technologies that you're most fired up about that you think have the best shot at really improving our food systems and helping us solve these problems in terms of resistance to climate change, helping us scale up our food system, which is really important?
I'll just give a few examples. One company called Inari is using CRISPR technology to edit the genomes of plants. So it's not foreign DNA coming in like GMO. It's taking genetic material that's already in the plant and either expressing or silencing those expressions to things like, yield increase or less water or heat tolerance. There's lots of different characteristics you can go after. I think that kind of technology, if used in the right way, could be really transformational about how do we adapt our plants to these much more extreme environments. A company that I'm on the board called Loam Bio has naturally occurring fungi that you coat seeds with, and they work with the plant's roots and sequester between 1 and 3 tons of carbon per acre per year, and then store that carbon and much more permanently in the soil. If you just look at the 95 million acres of corn we have, or the millions and millions of acres of wheat, et cetera, you're talking about gigatons potential of reduction every year if you get this kind of tech to scale, totally naturally occurring. And you could start generating real revenue as well as yield gains, by the way, for these growers. And that's like a win-win. Like farmers can make a lot more money, and you could be solving one of the biggest, existential crises that we have. And I do believe kind of food and agriculture is the only system on earth that can sequester enough carbon in the time horizon that the science says we have. Like a lot of the technologies that we hear about, like direct air capture, where you're like sucking these big plants that suck carbon out of the air, it's just not scalable at all in the time that we have. So I'm excited about those kind of technology. Another one that we've done is a company called Terradot, which basically it's called enhanced rock weathering. So you basically there's a certain kind of rocks that you grind up and you spread on the fields, which farmers are doing anyways with lime, and it reacts with the atmosphere and binds carbon into the soil and then locks that into the soil. It's good for the soil's health and permanently stores that carbon. These are technologies that could be pretty transformational, both for farmer economics and for the planet. So those are the kind of things that get me excited. Is the system's ability to actually solve this problem? I think it's the only system that really can.
You don't talk much about AI in the book. I'm wondering what role you think that has to play in terms of food and ag tech.
Yeah, we're seeing so many different AI applications right now. This is one of those tools that is going to have very extreme set of impacts, right? On the health side, I think AI is going to be transformational, not just in the food, but just in all of healthcare. I think you could see AI really solving a lot of health problems, like cracking the code on different diseases. I think you're going to see tons of efficiencies and automation on everything. And food and ag is still pretty stuck compared to other industries. There's plenty of technology in it, but it's very slow moving. So I think you're going to see a rapid change there. But you're also going to see just massive job losses. And it's really hard to know the implications of that on society and what is going to flow from that. The more and more people you have removed from actually producing our food, and it's basically just done by robots, which is definitely happening and going to happen. And there's benefits there. Like I think we'll become much more precise. Like all the precision agriculture, which has been talked about for so long, is now basically possible because of AI and automation, where you have electric, like autonomous vehicles that are run electric, with electricity as opposed to gas, means they can just keep running. And the vision that they have on these machines can just like apply exactly only what the plant needs. It's not just spraying everything. That's all now actually really possible. So it's a really mixed bag in pretty extreme ways. I think it's hard for anybody to know from this vantage point when we look back what we're going to think. I mean, I'll be frank, I'm worried about it. I think we got to be in that and try to shape it and try to help point it in the right direction because it's happening. So you could sort of say, I don't like it and stand on the sidelines, or you could try to get in there and try to make it work for people and eaters, especially. But I think the social media story, I think about it often now. Like when it first came out, nobody thought it was a bad thing. It was so fun to post your photos. And now it's like, playing a major role at fracturing our society in the most fundamental ways. And it's hard to see a way out of that. And so that story is a very cautious tale when it comes to AI. And I think we all should be paying a lot more attention to it, particularly on the regulatory side, than we are now.
You end the book by saying you're hopeful, but not optimistic, which is kind of a bummer, man. Like what happened to hope and change? Like, come on.
I'm hopeful.
But you're not optimistic.
Look, it's one of these very tough needles to thread because I feel like there's a responsibility to call it how it is, to be honest. But people don't respond that well to bad news necessarily. And so, how do you be honest, but also motivational? And I think that's what I was trying to thread. And I think the truth is I'm hopeful because we do have the capacity to solve this, or at least, mitigate the worst. I think we've already, some of this is going to be baked in, it's going to be bumpy. But if we got ourselves together and incentivized our economy in a different direction, we could avoid the worst of this and maybe ultimately come out in fundamentally a better place than we are today. And I do genuinely believe that. I think the lack of optimism in this moment is just rooted in what I'm observing in terms of like a global retreat on climate-related policies at all. Now we're like actively promoting fossil fuel burning and trying to throw money into coal and denying that climate change exists and erasing data systems and reporting systems across the government. And I do not see voters and consumers stepping up and saying, no, hold on, we care about this. This is bullshit. This is not what we're here for. We're going to rise up and say, we want something different. Like so far, I don't see that. And as the world starts to shift to more and more authoritarianism, which is a global phenomenon, it's not just happening here, that gives me even greater pause about our ability to solve these problems for ourselves. And I think we have to be honest about that and understand what the work is. Like we need people in office who believe in science, who believe in climate change, and believe that they have a real responsibility to, further our country's ability to navigate and solve these challenges. And if we're just denying it, then, we're not going to give ourselves a chance. So that's the tension in those two words for me.
All right, let's leave it there. Sam Kass, pleasure talking to you.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me. It was great fun.
Sam Kass's new book, The Last Supper, is out now. Pick up a copy wherever you do that kind of thing. If you loved this episode, please leave us a rating and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you had problems with this episode, send me an email. I'd love to talk about it with you. You can reach me at podcast@nextbigideaclub.com. The show was sound designed by Mike Toda. Our executive producer is Rufus Griscom. I'm Caleb Bissinger. See you next week.
Every minute your finance team spends wrestling with data is a minute lost. Insight Software's AI-powered insights instantly move you from complexity to clarity. Automated analysis, real-time reporting, strategic recommendations, all at your fingertips. Transform how your finance team works and watch your business grow. Stop wasting time. Start making smarter decisions. Learn more at insightsoftware.com/AI.